I am Kristy Fahland. I am an attorney at the law firm of Messerly and Kramer. I've been there for, 13 years, 14 years, somewhere around there now. My practice focuses a lot on employment law, probably 80% employment law, dealing on the employer side, managing HR issues and personnel problems as they arise. The rest of my practice is in contract law, shareholder disputes, and anything else that comes up. So that's my background. We're here today to talk about COVID again. Seems like I did this a lot about a year ago, and I think we all thought we had it figured out, and we all thought we were on a good path, and I didn't think I was going to be giving these discussions anymore because everyone had figured out how to do it. We knew what the rules of engagement were, and we were going along our way. In the last week and a half, I would say I have had more COVID-related calls, discussions, conferences, both with clients and internally with our own firm, trying to figure out now how we readjust and what we do. And it's primarily because of the Delta variant that's out there, the news coverage that there is on the Delta variant, the politics that surround it. And so employers specifically are kind of taking a step back, looking at where they are, trying to figure out what the landscape looks like and what we do, how we move forward, if we change, if we stay the same. COVID, of course, has a number of implications in the workplace. People have very strong personal beliefs both ways. There's the health impact. There's, of course, religious thoughts to it. There's political thoughts to it, a lot of those. And then there's the legal implications. So today I'm going to walk through kind of the rules of engagement from a legal sense and what the pieces are and what you need to be thinking of. But it's not really enough to stop and just say, here's the law. That doesn't practically help us try and solve these problems. But it will give you the guidelines so that you can decide as a company realistically what it is for you. A lot of people call and say, what should I do? And there's no one answer that I will give everybody. It's different depending on who your company is, what your culture is, what response your employees have had, what your goals are, how you manage employee retention at a time like this. So that's not a one-size-fits-all. It's a conversation on how we do it. So we will start with the legal framework. What are we looking at when we talk about COVID, specifically being an employer in the COVID era? What are the rules we have to deal with? And the first one that we always fall back on is our OSHA general duty. We're contractors, you guys are. You guys know the OSHA rules better than a number of my other clients do. So OSHA gives you the general duty that each employer has to furnish to each of its employees employment in a place of employment that's free from recognized hazards that are causing or likely to cause death or serious physical harm. COVID is one of those. COVID is a recognized hazard that every employer has a duty under the OSHA General Duty Clause to be aware of and to take steps to mitigate against. Now, OSHA doesn't have specific rules. OSHA doesn't give you a mask guidance, for most industries anyways, and it doesn't say here's what you must do. It just says you have to take measures to protect your employees. So that's where the kind of leeway on the employer side comes in. So we have that overarching duty that we have to keep in mind. We have state and local laws, not so much in play anymore. The state mask mandate and the remote work mandates have been lifted. Whether we go back to any of those, we will see some of the other parts of the country. LA, for example, is starting to reenact mask mandates, and so we might see some of those come back. But for right now, we're not dealing with any here locally that we have to worry about. The other is the CDC. Now, I put that in there. I suppose I can change this. There we go. I put it in there not because the CDC is a law, but the CDC, as everybody knows through the COVID time, has provided guidance on what we should do. And because there's not any set laws, our obligation under OSHA is to be reasonable. So we define our reasonableness based in part on what the CDC tells us. So we start to take guidance, and from a legal standpoint, our duty is governed in part by the CDC guidance. The next set we have is the EEOC and the ADA, so the Equal Employment Opportunity Laws, and of course the Americans with Disabilities Act. And these were triggered more recently with the vaccine discussion. And can you mandate the vaccine? What do you do about individuals with disabilities? How you do treat protected health data? Who can you require to get it? All of these concerns that we had, really, they were there a little bit before the vaccine, but they were implicated with this. And then the final set of laws we have to think about, just in a general employment context, wage and hour laws. If you're going to mandate the vaccine, you have to pay people when they go get their vaccine. And they don't have to travel very far to get it, but it used to be that some people were traveling to outlying counties, and that was compensable time. Things like paid leave laws. Again, we don't have the federal mandated leave laws anymore, and I don't think those will come back, but it's something to keep on our radar. But your own PTO policies. If you're in Minneapolis and St. Paul, you have the city sick leave policies that are going to come into play with COVID, and potentially, getting the vaccine. The National Labor Relations Act, and most people say, well, this is for union workforces. I don't have a union workforce, and most of it is, but there is part of the National Labor Relations Act that deals with all employers, whether you're unionized or not, and it gives all employees the right to discuss the terms and conditions of their employment. And in the COVID world, that's whether or not you feel safe with your COVID protocols, whether or not you think your employers are doing enough to protect you, and this is what we refer to as the water cooler talk. You can't discipline people for water cooler talk if it relates to the terms and conditions of their employment. And then the last one that we've seen come into play a lot are the whistleblower laws, anti-retaliation laws. Of course, if anybody in good faith reports what they believe to be illegal conduct, they're protected. The way this is playing out nowadays in a lot of the new lawsuits that we're seeing, our people go to their employers and they say, I don't feel safe in the workplace, I don't think your COVID protocols are enough, or you're not requiring masks, you're not doing this. And then 2 weeks later, when that person is late for work or fails to call in and they get a disciplinary slip for it, all of a sudden that becomes a retaliatory action and they have a claim under OSHA or a number of other state and local laws. So that we're seeing pop up a lot as people are trying to get the protection. It doesn't mean they're successful, but it means you now have a claim and potentially a lawsuit that you have to deal with. So that's the big picture of the legal landscape. I just throw it out there to kind of say these are what they are, and then what we'll do is walk through specifically how these different laws are implicated in the situations that we go through. So we start from where we were. We go back to 2020 when we learned everything that we thought we weren't going to have to relearn. And not because 2020 was so fun and everybody wants to go back to it, but a lot of the issues we dealt with in 2020, because of the Delta variant, are now being revisited, readdressed, and we have to reassess if what we're doing is sufficient. Science changes, everything behind the virus changes, and so we have to change with it. In 2020, there was a mandate for a COVID-19 preparedness plan in the state of Minnesota. This written plan is no longer mandated by executive order, but hopefully everybody had one of those. And those are what we go back to now as a starting point when people come to me and say, what do we do? I go back and say, where did we start from? What did you have? And if you have one of those, and you changed your policies, say when COVID first came out, a lot of people had them that said masks are required because it's a state mandate. Here's what we're going to do. Here's your quarantine time. And then when the mask mandate was lifted, they didn't necessarily change their COVID policy. So if you need to update your policy, this is a great time to do it. You shouldn't have one saying you still have a mask mandate unless you're enforcing it. But we go back and look at things that were in our policy, which was, the basic education. Here's what COVID is. Here's what the symptoms are, right? Health screening. If you have any of these, don't come to work. Seek medical advice. It had your policies on masks, what you were going to do with masks. Social distancing, what was required. Do you still have a communal lunchroom? Do people have to stay so far apart? Some people put up barriers in the office, the plexiglass barriers that we see in so many places now. a helpful reminder of hygiene standards. Wash your hands in the workplace. Those were in there. And for some people, it was the ability to work remotely if you could. Doesn't apply to field work, but for a lot of office personnel, it was the standards for when you can work remotely and when you can't. I also talked about things like what to do with the positive test. And I know there's different science now about if you're vaccinated, you know, and you were potentially exposed, do you need to quarantine, do you need to not? I'm going to tell you, talk to your healthcare provider and follow their advice. I've heard different healthcare providers give different advice. But all of these things, paid leave, how much, whether you're going to be able to use PTO when you're on, if you've got COVID, if you don't, are you going to get paid? All of these things we need to sit back and look at now again and say, oh, we're back. We're back in the thick of it. The numbers are going up. So what do we do? Yeah.
Is there a sheet out there that says, kind of gives you some guidelines if someone's been vaccinated or not? Is there a sheet out there anywhere yet? Or it's just a, well, my doctor says this and your doctor says that.
There's
Dr. Joe says that.
there's CDC guidance on things like masking and not masking.
If you were by someone and you're vaccinated.
I have now heard this week for the first time, because I've seen a doctor's note that said it, that a vaccinated individual that was in a conference room with somebody who tested positive was told to quarantine for 14 days even though they were vaccinated.
Start Googling.
Would they?
Well, the doctor's note just said they need to quarantine for 14 days. So
really there's no guidance out there to base it off and tweak as works for yours.
No, you just gotta go with what their medical provider tells them to. So,
If they have a doctor's note, you pretty much have to go with
Right,
that.
but I'm thinking if you don't. So like if someone came in, say that Dana's in my office, she came in and her son was by someone that had it, or even her son had it, who is, 20 and lives in her basement. There's nothing out there that says this is what you should do.
before seeing this note this week, it was if you're vaccinated. My understanding was you did not need to
So
quarantine.
she's saying,
Right,
where did
before
you
seeing the
get
note.
that information?
It was
And it
very
was just
similar. It was an employee's son who was exposed at daycare. And, the son then goes in and seeks treatment. And the dad, even though dad was vaccinated, was instructed by his medical doctors to
So it's
quarantine
just,
for the 14
who
days.
says what, when, but
Yeah. So if someone comes in and says, "Hey, I was exposed," you say, do you have any medical advice telling you need to be out of the workplace? No. If they're vaccinated, you can probably keep them in the workplace.
Okay.
If they're not,
But what's your guideline as an employee or employer to say, come back after you're tested, even though it's within the quarantine period, or?
yeah, and you have the right as an employer, you can require a test before they come back. And I'm certainly going to say if they've tested negative, I don't know that I think their quarantine ends technically even under a doctor's note.
Okay.
So this is kind of like what we did before the vaccine, right? Just think about what would you do a year ago when an employee came in and said, "Oh, I saw my sister who has COVID." We'd say, "Whoa, back up and either test or don't come in for 14 days and wait it out." So you can do the same thing now, and it's probably in your old preparedness plan what to do if you've been exposed. And
the
so
vaccination just throws that new.
the
I was
vaccination,
going to say, that's why I was wondering if there was anything out where they could come back and say, well, this says you're supposed to do this. And it's like,
Right.
I didn't know about that. So, okay, but there's nothing in writing or publicized about the whole vaccinated
Like a
person.
flow
It's kind
chart
of a
kind of
head,
a deal,
right,
like you used to
exactly.
have.
It's what the physician might say to an individual.
yes.
We can't be held accountable because there's nothing that, you should have read in the new policy.
Well, with the exception of, I think if you have an unvaccinated person that comes in and says they've been exposed, we treat it just
The
like
unvaccinated,
just
yeah.
like we did before, which is, quarantine and wait until you have symptoms. And there is CDC guidance on all of this that talks about like when to wear masks, what to do if you have symptoms. We used to look at it a long time before the vaccine, and we
Right.
haven't looked at it recently. So it is out there that says, if you've been exposed, then you should follow this. And I can send the link
That's
out.
all out there, but with the vaccine part. So here's what it was before the vaccine.
It is there are some updated guidance.
Update. Okay, that's what I was wondering.
Yeah.
Okay.
Currently,
Yes,
isn't the mask is a mandate, but if you're not vaccinated, you should still be wearing the mask. Is that the rule now?
Yeah.
So I think it is, right?
So, changed yesterday. If you have the handout, I'm sorry, I didn't get to redo the handout yet, but it is on here. So, the until yesterday, the CDC mask guidance said if you're vaccinated, you don't have to wear one, but
That changed.
you can. Yep. So yesterday we have a brand new guidance because of Delta. And the new guidance comes out and says even fully vaccinated individuals should wear a mask in public indoor settings, again, outdoors is different, if you're in an area of substantial or high transmission. Now, there's a nice little link from the CDC website. You put in your county, and it tells you, are you in substantial, low, moderate, or high transmission? In the metro right now, Scott County is the only metro county that I'm aware of as of yesterday that falls within one of these substantial or high transmission rates. If you've got some work in outstate Minnesota, there are other counties, I think there might be 10. You go outside of Minnesota and some of the other states have a much higher rate of these high transmission areas, so just be aware of where your workforces are and know that, you know, if you're in Scott County and you got a job in Scott County and you got a job trailer out there, technically CDC guidance says vaccinated or not, you got to have a mask on if you step inside.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you have offices in Scott County, or, you know, as these things change, because the Delta numbers are changing so quickly, one day a county can pop into one of these high or substantial transmission rates. So,
Is there somewhere that you can get on a list where it can, your safety director can get pinged when a county is added?
I'm not aware of a list where it'll tell you.
Okay.
Um,
You just need to look every day, or do you know how often it gets updated? I'm assuming daily.
I think it's updated daily,
Okay.
and I know, you know, just the news stories, at least up till now, have been covering the counties, so you can find it on like Fox 9 News.
Watch TV. So.
Right, well, you can find it on the website for those of us without TV. Yeah,
If it's on Hulu, I wouldn't know that it was happening.
that's true.
So we should basically start kind of from day one with trying to keep updated.
Yeah, know where you have indoor facilities, and just monitor those. You know, at least every Monday morning, every Friday afternoon. I don't know if you need to do it daily. It'd be great if you could, but we all have jobs to do.
Be reasonable.
So check it. You'll know if the metro counties hit it because the news is going to be all over it. If Ramsey County or Hennepin County jump into there, that's all we're going to hear about for a while. So,
I'm gonna get yelled at going into quick trip or something. Oh, guess there's a new
I'll go
rule.
back to the car.
Yep. And again, this is a guidance. This is not a law. And as of now, Governor Wells has not done anything statewide to put in a law, but it is a guidance. And so your best practice is always to follow this to limit your legal liability. Because if you got a trailer or a location in Scott County and you're not requiring everybody to wear a mask, and you have an exposure, and you have an employee that gets it from work, the first thing they're going to say is, did you follow the CDC guidance? No. Okay, well, then you have you've got a potential claim, and your liability is greater than if you are able to say, I did everything the CDC's told me to do, and they still got it. So we can't be perfect, but we can try the best we can. So it brings up the question of what do we do with masks, right? We thought we had this figured out. We don't. So you've got some options, right? You have one end of the spectrum, which a lot of people have thought we were on and love to be on. This is the no mask requirement. And this takes a couple different variations, but this is the no masks required to come in. Vaccinated or unvaccinated, I don't care. They're not required. Okay, there's benefits to it. It avoids getting into vaccination status. All your employees are treated equally. You don't have to get into the uncomfortable views about vaccination status because some people hold those very closely to their heart. But it's going to leave some of your employees feeling unprotected if there's nothing done. And now one variation of this that we see a lot of, and that you see if you walk in Target, is mask is not required, but it's recommended for people who are unvaccinated. And that's a variation of this. And a lot of workplaces have that too. And I think based on our polls and just talks with our clients, that's where a lot of people work. And probably still are right now, although having discussions about it, is if you're vaccinated, no masks. If you're unvaccinated, recommended, but we're not checking cards and they're not required. If you're not going to require masks, legally you should always have the recommendation to wear it, and it always has to be an option. You can never discipline an employee because they want to wear one, right? Mm-hmm. But the problem with this, and what we've seen in practice, is if that's your policy, people who are reading the news about the Delta variant now are going to start coming to you, and they're going to say, I'm uncomfortable knowing that unvaccinated people don't have to wear a mask in the office. Joe next to me might be unvaccinated, and I want to know that he has to wear a mask or I'm not coming back to work. I don't feel safe. That's most of the conversations that we're hearing right now, and that's what's fueling employers to kind of look at this and say, do we have to change the policy? The easy change is to say, or the smallest incremental change is to say, if you're unvaccinated, they are now required. And the Delta variant is a great way to do it. Some people still don't want to make that jump, and again, it depends on your culture and how your employees are, how they're feeling. A lot of it depends on how many you have that are unvaccinated versus not, and the setup, right? If you have couple people in the office and most people are out in the field, this might not be a big deal. Office workers, if you've got a big, for us, we're lawyers, we're usually always in the office, it's a bigger deal. People are in cubicles, they're right next to each other, we have to deal with it. So that's one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum that we've actually seen some people adopt is masks for everybody again. I don't care if you're vaccinated or not. And based on now the new CDC guidance, that gives you some coverage if you want to do that as well. Mm-hmm. And the benefits of this are you don't have to ask who's vaccinated and who's not. You don't care. Again, you don't get into these questions about how people feel philosophically about the vaccine. Everybody has to wear it. Everybody's treated equally, and it's easy to enforce. Because if anybody is not wearing one, they have to put one on. Mm-hmm. Simple. The problem is a lot of people feel this is going backwards. And what you'll hear from the realistic side is you'll have your vaccinated employees come in and say, I got vaccinated and I don't want to have to do this anymore. The unvaccinated people are ruining this for me. I don't want to wear a mask. And again, this new CDC guidance gives us some cover. Before yesterday, we were getting a lot of pushback, but some people have opted to do this. Then you got the middle of the road requirement, which is masks for some. And you have to decide on what that some are. The easy line to draw is masks for the unvaccinated. If you're vaccinated, you don't need it. Some people say it depends on your work setup. Companies that have multiple offices, if you can social distance and keep everybody apart, they don't require everybody to have a mask. If you're in a, communal work area and you're constantly working with other people, so sometimes it's by position or by location or by however the setup is. But the middle of the ground is masks for some, not masks for others. And this is the point where, yes, you should know vaccination status, because otherwise you don't have a mechanism to enforce it. Mm-hmm. And you got to realize that some employees are going to be very sensitive to divulging their vaccination status. So one of the ways we've seen to do this, if this is the camp that you might want to be in, is to say, we require masks for all of our unvaccinated workers. If you're vaccinated, you don't have to wear one. If you don't want to disclose your vaccination status, you need to wear one. And then you have the people that come up and say, I don't want to tell you if I'm vaccinated or not. Fine. I don't need to know. But if you don't want to tell us, put a mask on. It's that easy. Mm-hmm. And you'll have some people that are vaccinated that wear one anyways, because we hear if only unvaccinated people have to wear a mask, everyone's going to know I'm not vaccinated. Well, no. Yeah.
How many discrimination cases do you think are going to come out of that? Just because they can. Is it right? But I've been through the legal system. I know it works.
Yeah. It's hard to say because the employer has a duty to protect the health, right? whatever policy you have, and this is where the EEO laws come in, cannot have a discriminate impact based on any number of things, right? So race, religion, sex, sexual orientation, status on the public commission, any of the protected classes. So their argument would have to be something along the lines of this mask policy is discriminatory against women. I mean, it's really not. The legitimate business reason for it is X, Y, and Z. But that's why if you go to this masks required for some, you get into the spot where you're not treating all employees equally. So you have to know where to draw the difference. Vaccinated versus unvaccinated is one way to draw the difference, because all you need to defend that discrimination claim is legitimate business reason. Vaccinated versus unvaccinated is one way. Job position is another, indoor versus outdoor, right? Or the setup, able to socially distance versus not able to socially distance.
Choice.
Or their choice.
If you don't want to disclose, then
You just wear one.
you just, okay.
Right. A lot of what we're hearing is you don't have the right to ask me my vaccination status. I'm not required to disclose my vaccination status. My vaccination status is protected by HIPAA. No.
No, because you give vaccination workers to schools all the time.
None of it is true. There were some questions, and there was a recent guidance put out that says asking your vaccination status is not a medical inquiry under the Americans with Disabilities Act, and you are entitled to do it. Now, you have to treat that information confidentially, and so it should only be inquired by your HR person or someone who's trained to ask for that information, so you know what you want and what you don't want. You don't want any other health information. You just want vaccination status. And if you're going to go down the road about proof of vaccination, you have to decide as an organization, and again, this is a culture issue, if you take the position that if you're unvaccinated, you have to wear a mask. Vaccinated people don't have to, but you have to show me your vaccine card. Well, you can do that, or you can take it on the honor system and say, answer a questionnaire and tell me if you're vaccinated or not. Again, this comes down to company culture, retention. Some people, even if they're vaccinated, think that having to prove it and show their card is a little more intrusive than an employer should be. You know, they get it if they're choosing to go on an airplane or something along those lines. But to get to work, so a lot of companies will do these informal polls too, if you're big enough and have enough people. And you can send it out and say, you know, an anonymous poll, what's your status? What are your feelings on this? Would you be comfortable disclosing it? Would you be comfortable coming back to the office if we had this policy? And you can try and gauge where you are. The smaller companies, you know that, because you see the people and you've probably had these conversations already. So the mask debate is back. Those are kind of the options.
Is vaccine technically, you're vaccinated 14 days after your last dose? Or immediately after your last dose?
The CDC guidance has on their webpage, like when you go to the mask guidance, it has one for vaccinated versus unvaccinated people, and it will tell you when you are considered fully vaccinated, and it says it's 14 days after your last dose, you know, or if you're the one shot, 14 days after that. So it's not immediately, and they do qualify, you know, if you've got one of the 2 doses, once you got to get both of them. So it'll tell you what vaccination status is considered. All right, so moving from masks to vaccines, the question I get a lot is, can an employer require any employee entering the workplace to be vaccinated for COVID-19? And the legal answer is yes, you can. You can make a requirement that if you're going to be in the workplace, you have to be vaccinated. With the caveat that we have the Americans with Disabilities Act and the religious protections that need to be put in place. So if somebody has a sincerely held religious belief that puts them against vaccination, or if they have a disability or a medical condition that prevents them from being vaccinated, you need to go through a reasonable accommodation process with them before you can just say, well, then you're not allowed to work. And that looks differently depending on what your workplace looks like. So if you have a mandatory vaccine policy, and you have an employee that comes in and says, I have, an autoimmune system or something that I can't get vaccinated, but I really want to come to work. Before you can just say, well, you can't get vaccinated, you're fired, we don't have a job for you. The accommodation policy looks like, what can we do to eliminate that risk, right? Can we sufficiently mask that individual to protect everybody else? Could we put them at a separate workstation with barriers? Some companies I've seen are doing testing. Fine, but test every other week, and let's make sure, on top of all of these other measures, it might be remote work. Okay, you stay remote for a while until we can figure something out. It could be different shifts. You got to look at it based on what that person's job is, the requirements of their job, and what your workforce can handle, and what you can do. But you can't just systematically say, too bad, sorry you got a problem, sorry your religious belief doesn't allow that, you can't come to work. And the religious belief is not just what we think we know about religious beliefs. It's a sincerely held set of governing principles. So just because you haven't heard of the religion doesn't mean it's not a valid religion. So you can imagine some people are getting creative. If that's you, I can't give you enough advice on this webinar on how to do it. But talk with the lawyer. You can ask for confirmation of their religious beliefs. What that looks like is very challenging. I've only seen one of these so far that has a self-created religion to get around the vaccine, but I imagine you might see more of it the more that they're mandated. And, back to Jolene's question here, again, your vaccine requirements can't discriminate based on any protected class status. So you need to be careful, because you could inadvertently create an issue, right? If most of your office staff, let's just say, are female, and most of your field staff are male, and you say only the office staff have to be vaccinated, you've now created a disparate impact upon women. Not intentional. It just
in the court, that's what you're going to argue.
But that, right, but
Even
in
knowing
practice,
that's not what happened.
that's what's
No,
happened.
they sit like this in the office.
Right. So you just need to be aware, whatever policy you make, to play it out in your head and say, how is this going to affect what my workforce actually looks like? And am I taking any particular population and treating them differently? Even though I don't intend to, is the result different treatment?
That's kind of what came to mind when you mentioned when employers require it and then they make an accommodation for someone who can't get it. Let's just say it's religious reason. Then you have this corner office with these glass bubble deal going on for this group of people who can't be vaccinated for whatever reason they've chosen. That would look very different in a large company. And I can see that creating some sort of culture issue or discrimination looking type of situation.
It would definitely create a culture issue in most companies, maybe not all, but in most companies I can see it creating a culture issue. The legal issue is easily addressed because you're required to do that because of either a religious belief or a medical disability, something along those lines. So that's the answer. But practically how that works when, Joe wants to know why he's got to work in a cube next to Sally because Sally talks too much and she's loud. He wants a quiet office like the people that have medical conditions have. Why doesn't he get one? Yeah, it's a managerial problem and it's a culture issue to
But
work
if
through.
everyone in that corner starts to look a certain way, or everyone in the separated group starts to look a certain way, then you can run into
You could, yeah. And, the important part about all of this is even your best practices are never bulletproof. In employment law, we've seen a lot of good ones. And you see a lot of stories that are just completely fabricated, too. And so we always say we can't stop a claim. We can't 100% prevent the claim, but what we can do is set up your best defense. And so when you write that policy, and that's why it's important to have it written, because at some point, if you ever get challenged, that's what they're going to come back to. And if it's in your head, your managers are probably going to remember it different ways, and everybody, no fault of theirs, it's just we all have a million things going on. So if you have that policy written down and you go through and say, well, when we thought about it, there wasn't going to be a disparate impact, and all we're doing is applying a facially neutral policy, that's your best defense. So, yes, you can require your employees to get vaccines. Most employers are not going that way. It's a small percentage that I would say that are mandating it. And it's not very popular for reasons that you can imagine, and it causes a lot of turmoil for those that don't want to get vaccinated in the workplace. There are some small companies that we work with that a lot of family companies, and you got 5 or 6 people in the workforce, and so they'll mandate it because they pretty much know everybody's views on it already, and it's not a big deal. But if you don't know, or sometimes it's even surprising when you start to have these conversations, you'll realize how strongly some people feel against it. So the other step some employers have taken is to incentivize the vaccine. We're not going to require it, but we're going to incentivize it. Now, your mask policy might be one way to incentivize it. You don't want to wear a mask at work? You get vaccinated. That's an easy way to do it. Mm-hmm. Other companies have gone to, gifts, drawings, giveaways. You can do that. There was some question for a while, and luckily we've gotten some recent guidance that if you want to incentivize your employees to do it, you can give them a $100 Amazon gift card. You can give them PTO. I've seen a lot of companies do that. Everybody that gets vaccinated, you get a free week of PTO. And they're like, well, that's great. I'd love another week off of work. Paid. That sounds wonderful. So you can incentivize them. The important thing to do is, if you're going to incentivize, always provide it with education, right? That's the goal in all of this, would be to provide them an education about the vaccine so that they feel comfortable and make a free choice. It should not look like coercion. And if it looks coercive, that's a problem. Here's $10,000 to go get vaccinated. Well, that kind of takes a free choice out of a person because they really need that money. Mm-hmm. So, yes, you can offer incentives. You can offer, little gifts or company-branded items, sweatshirts, PTO. But don't make it so big that it makes it too hard for them to say no, because then it looks like coercion.
No, this is an off-the-cuff question, but I got 100 employees. 20 of them don't want to get vaccinated, so I'm going to give them a free week. My other 80 people are going to come back and say, but I got vaccinated.
There's no week.
Yeah, they sure are.
Is there any problem with treating people differently there, or you just say, well, whatever?
No.
Has it come up yet?
It hasn't. I mean, the scenarios where I've seen it so far have been it's been company giveaways. A lot of things like that. Here's your sweatshirt, here's your Yeti
So you
cup,
just give it to all-
here's your this. If you've been vaccinated, here you go. But it is something to think about from a culture perspective, that certainly those people that went out and did it voluntarily are going to be like, whoa, where's my reward?
Think about
Or,
it before it happens,
yeah,
and all of a
I get a
sudden,
special sticker and that's it. I want what they had. So you have to you got to figure out a way so that you don't have the culture issue and the feelings of animosity there too. And I will say that this only applies, the incentive, if you are not giving the vaccines. I don't think anybody here is. There are some big companies that will host a vaccine clinic and they will provide it for their employers. If you're doing that, there's specific rules because you might be getting other information. But if you're sending them out to a third party to get their vaccine, you're fine to offer an incentive. If you're bringing in someone to vaccinate at your office, seek legal counsel for all kinds of reasons.
And you have say that I said, okay, I'm going to give you an incentive, we're going to send you out, or we're going to do this vaccine thing, and someone has a reaction. What is that on the company? Can that go back to the company as you told these people to get vaccinated, and now they had some sort of reaction, crazy reaction?
So it certainly will if you're mandating vaccines.
Okay.
And that's, as we look at the pros and cons of mandating a vaccine, that's part of it, is if you mandate it and they have an adverse reaction, you might have a work comp claim.
But if it's a voluntary, then
If it's voluntary, we didn't make you do it, it was not a
Even if you
condition of your
did it,
employment,
even if
right?
you've given them something, it's
Yeah.
still
And that's it.
voluntary.
Yeah.
Yeah, as long as it's not that $10,000, that starts to look
Don't worry about
non-voluntary.
Can afford
And the other question we get, and we touched on it a little bit, is when we're in the vaccine world, can I ask my employees who's vaccinated? The short answer is yes, but then my lawyer answer says yes, but all of these things. So the guidance says, yes, you have the right to ask an employee if they have been vaccinated or not. And it's not a medical inquiry under the ADA that's prohibited. However, only ask vaccination status. Do not get any other medical information. You need to decide whether, as we talked about, that trust factor is there and you just want them to answer, or if you're going to require seeing their card. And you need to control who does it. You need to make sure, because this is where the conversations come up in real life, and I say, Kia, as your employer, have you been vaccinated? And you might say, I haven't, but I have MS. I'm fighting cancer and nobody knew it. I have something else that requires, and all of a sudden now you've opened the gates.
Yep.
And depending on who asked that question, if that's a lower level supervisor or somebody else that's not trained on how to answer that, their next couple words could be very bad for the company.
Mm-hmm.
So you want somebody in HR or somebody trained on how to respond to that to answer appropriately. The other thing is, once that information is disclosed, it is confidential health information that the employer has. So if your HR team knows, it cannot be distributed. This cannot become the rumor mill. And if you keep records of it, it needs to be kept in a confidential medical file aside from their personnel file. And if you've got anyone that's got other medical issues, that needs to be kept separately anyways. So how that information is stored is important. Now the real life way that this comes into play, and this is what you'll see, is you'll have Sally come into the office and say, Sue was in my office yesterday and she didn't have a mask on. Is she vaccinated? Sally, we can't disclose that information. You just can't. Even if an employee says, I deserve to know which one of my coworkers are vaccinated and not, as an employer, you can't tell them. And that means even if your supervisors know, so if you've got a supervisor, somebody underneath them comes to them and says, I don't believe in getting vaccinated, I'm never going to get vaccinated, your supervisors are spokespeople of the company. That supervisor can't spread that information around. So it gets hard because your employees are going to want to know, or at least we've found that most employees do want to know who in the office is or isn't. But this is not the Scarlet Letter. We can't put something on them and brand folks as they walk around. So you just...
Are you sure?
It's a conversation to have. Yep.
Vaccination status.
And it's not just the workforce. I was in Target, and there's a line, and there is a conversation being had, and a woman had a mask on, and an unmasked woman went up and literally said, why aren't you vaccinated? Don't you know you're putting the rest of us in danger? Do you feel that that's appropriate? Can't you just... And the woman at first was like... Yep, at first she said, please just... I just want to finish my shopping. And finally the woman had enough to turn around. She says, I am vaccinated, thank you. I am. But I'm worried enough about my health that I wear this anyways.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So if that's happening in Target, it's happening in your workplaces too. Or it's going to. Because it's getting to be a hotter and hotter issue.
Have you guys seen the airplane drama?
Yeah. So when you try and make these decisions about what are you going to do about vaccines in your workplace, you've got a number of considerations. Employee privacy is one of them. And that goes for vaccinated and unvaccinated people. Not everybody wants their employer to know where their views are on it. And they have a self-invested right in this. Now, they will tell you, I don't have to tell you my vaccination status. I have a right to privacy. Again, that really doesn't fly. But they have a privacy expectation that you need to be aware of as a culture and what that's going to do. whether to require vaccines or not, again, depends on what your workforce looks like and how you're set up. Can you socially distance? How many people do you have? How much mingling is going on? Recognize vaccines aren't widely accepted by everybody. Look at your culture and look at your retention. I think everybody knows it's hard to find people in most industries right now. And so the last thing you want to do is alienate your employees, because every employee out there knows if they don't like where they are, they can find another job. And so if you've got good people, you want to do what you can to save your good people. We talked about the legal exposure. If you require vaccines, if they have side effects, you have to look at that. Potential work comp claim. There are some potential claims going on out there that because the vaccines are only under emergency authorization, that you shouldn't be able to authorize them. I've seen a number of very interesting concocted legal claims coming up around COVID-19 that we never thought would exist. So anytime that you go to one side or the other, just know you got a potential out there. So if you're going to mandate vaccines and someone is dead set against it, whether it's going to win at the end of the day or not, you could be giving rise to potential liability.
It's going to cost you a lot.
Yeah. And if you have if you're a unionized workforce, you got to talk. This might be an issue you have to bargain, and that's where you probably need to look at, and you probably did back in 2020 if you've got a unionized workforce when you come up with your COVID protocols and everything. Depends on your CBA. Are these issues you have to bargain with the union for before you can put them in place? Masking requirements, maybe not. Again, it depends on your individual agreement, but the vaccination issue is something that even if you don't have to, you might want to. So if you've got a unionized workforce, it's something to consider and to have discussions about. And so then, since it is the Association of Women Contractors, we're going to move to the question not just for your employees, but what can other people mandate? Can a general contractor mandate that only vaccinated workers can be on their site? And the answer is probably yes. Again, as a lawyer, we don't really give you absolutes.
That's a lawyer answer.
Yep.
Yes this time, and it's no this time.
So,
Maybe no.
if this is a new job, if you are bidding a new job and this is a requirement that is disclosed before you go on site, most likely yes. They can say, if you're going to bid and you want this job, only vaccinated workers can be on this job. And you know it. The problem is, what do you do if you're midstream right now? If you're midstream in a job and all of a sudden, and it's not a state or local mandate, that's going to change things if the law changes, right?
Change the rules in the middle.
But if you're in the middle of a job right now and all of a sudden the general changes their mind and says we're going to start mandating only vaccinated workers on site, and it's not an owner requirement or anything else, but that's what they want to do, can they do it? That's a contractual issue, and that depends on the language of your contract. And you need to look at things like who's responsible for the safety conditions on the job, and are there clauses in your contract that say things like subcontractor agrees to follow all safety protocols set out by the general. The AIA has that language. It's safety measures initiated by the contractor. If you use a standard AIA, it usually is in there. But I've seen some other general contractors' agreements, their standard form says subcontractor shall be solely responsible for all safety conditions on its work. Okay, maybe. So if you're midstream, it's something that you got to look at your contract language to decide. But on a new job, can they say only vaccinated workers allowed on site? They can. It does not relieve your obligation as an employer to still try to accommodate your employees that might have religious beliefs or disabilities. So if you've got, a crew that's going out in a job and it's going to be your owner or general is saying vaccinated people only, and Bob would normally go out on that job, Bob comes to you and says, well, I can't go on that job because I can't get vaccinated because I have a health condition that prevents me from being vaccinated. Well, you can't say, Bob, you're fired. You can go to the general or the owner and say, we have a person with a disability. Do you have a built-in accommodation process, can we use that? And I would say go to them first and talk to them about it. If not, you got to put Bob on another job. Doesn't mean Bob's just hanging out and he's not working for you anymore, but it might mean that he can't go to that job. So, but
You're
important.
disclosing his disability too.
Well, yes, I wouldn't disclose his name. So,
Right, you're.
No, but if
you're-
you have 4 people on there and 3 are there and yet
Yeah.
you're 4th and all of a sudden,
yeah, the best case scenario is a new job, right, where you're not having to pull
Put
somebody
someone
off
in a
because
different
it's
place.
changing midstream. But to go to them and say, if you have someone that puts that in a contract requirement, I would have the conversation with them up front before you ever sign the contract and say, what are we going to do? I'm not saying we have any, but what are we going to do if an employee comes to me and
Right.
says that they have a medical condition that prevents them from being vaccinated? Do you have a plan for that? And if they have their own employees on the job site, they have to have a plan for that.
But
And
there's
how are they
just
gonna
a
handle it?
Reasonable accommodation that we need to
Right.
address, and we're wondering if you guys can
Before,
accommodate
yep.
it. Mhm.
So,
So, could this be likened, and I asked Kristy to put this in, and to address this, because this actually has recently happened with a member of ours, and it had to do with a nursing home facility, a senior center, and they didn't want anyone working on their facility that was open, but it was a different wing, without those employees being vaccinated of the contractors. Now, to me, this is similar to the workers that were working on, say, a federal building, and they have to
Background
pass
check.
severe background or security checks out at MAC or anything. Can it fall under that as requirements?
in
I mean,
a
wouldn't it? I mean, in
yeah,
some ways.
in a new contract, it would.
In a new contract.
Yeah, the problem is trying to, if you're in a contract that it's not already in, do you have some wiggle room to say we don't have to follow it right now? But on a new requirement, the owner, the GC can set their standards and their requirements and say only vaccinated people in because it's for the health and protection of a nursing home population, or because we want to protect our own people, so we got to make sure our subs are all vaccinated too, whatever it
Yeah,
happens to be.
So you also said, and just make sure I'm clear, when the contract was signed, we didn't have Delta variant. Now
Mhm.
Delta variant changes things, and would it be in a contract addendum that would have to come out, or how would that work?
It could be, and it's also something depending on your contract that would be a change condition that you could get a increased cost for too, or try and negotiate new terms. I mean, it depends on what your contract says as far as ability to change it. Is this a construction change directive? Is it something that you're entitled to additional compensation? One of the things that we've seen is some people now requiring testing prior to going on a job site, or if you've got a crew of 5, I want all 5 tested. Okay, well, if we're going to do that, then we have to take the additional time, because even though testing is usually free, if you're requiring your employees to test, you have to pay them for their time. So I want to be compensated, general contractor, for the time I got to pay 10 guys to go sit in line for 2 hours and get tested. That's 20 hours of time. I want to get compensated for that.
So you're
So I would just recommend to always be proactive as a small business owner as you're signing your contracts, and that maybe the contractor, the prime, hadn't thought about it, but that you're doing work on a hospital, or you're doing work on a senior facility and things like that, and maybe it's not in your contract because
Yeah,
the
maybe.
owner hadn't thought about pushing it down yet. I mean, I would think as small businesses, we should just be really proactive on thinking those things through in this particular time again.
Mm-hmm.
For going forward, because in a bigger organization, it's gonna be like, oh, we need to throw this in our contract, not even realizing what it's gonna affect down the.
down the road.
Yeah.
to others.
And as a small company, it's probably worth, having a conversation with your workforce too. And this is the guide-in to do it, is the new mask guidance because of the Delta variant, and to just say, hey, heads up, the CDC's got new guidance that even vaccinated people are starting to have to wear masks in certain counties. If this moves to us, you're going to be required to put a mask on again, because some people are very anti-masks again. And you can lead it into, we're expecting as this gets worse to see more requirements, whether it's masking requirements, whether it's vaccination requirements.
Before the safety meeting.
Right.
Yeah, cause it's when we ran into it, it wasn't us, but we were working on a big contract, and that organization says everyone's gotta have masks, so it's like, here you go, here's your, have it on you.
Yeah, I would have that conversation now so that if you get one of those down the road or as things change,
Coming back.
at least it's in their mind now, because the
It
opposite
is what it
is
is.
3 months from now you just drop it on it saying, whoa, got a new job and anybody unvaccinated ain't going, or anybody that doesn't want to wear a mask on a Shakopee job can't be there.
So, Christy, on that same vein, so now the rumblings in the news, as you said, that we're hearing something different every day, is that there could potentially be all federal employees maybe mandated to get vaccines.
Right.
Trickle down of that is that if you're working on any kind of a federal job site or federal funded site, that may affect your employees, and that actually could be mandated per this. Is that what I'm understanding? And as the federal laws might change.
Yeah.
This conversation is part 2, part 3, part 4.
Right. This
presentations.
this could continue to
Or your business gets bigger, is what you're saying?
evolve. Yeah, depending on who decides to mandate it, right?
Abort mission.
The GCs, from their vantage point, mandatory vaccines are not the norm right now. So nobody wants to be the first one to come out there and require it. And then they have these same considerations that we went through. If you as an employer require it, they have those as well. They have an increased cost consideration that they have to think about. They have liability risks for if they require it and something happens. They have policing information that they're going to have to be responsible for. So, and who wants to bid on their jobs, and do they need the work done? So they also have considerations they have to take into play. I haven't seen anybody put them into place yet, other than maybe on a.
I'm gonna put it on my marketing, fully vaccinated staff.
There you go.
Or we think.
right on your business card
Probably, yes.
with an asterisk at the end.
Probably, yes.
There you go. Like it. Wow, this is,
Yeah, it's
Oh,
going to
they're gonna
continue
retire?
to change as this goes. Yeah, I would like to say hopefully in Minnesota we're going to stay a little bit more isolated, just because if you look at our percentages, they tend to be pretty good.
Percentages of infected people or vaccinated?
Vaccinated people, yeah.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, but if we jump into that, substantial or high transmission rate, I think you're going to start to see a lot more employer requirements, probably owner requirements, government requirements, mask mandates coming back, any number of things. So.
Mhm.